Thanks to Webroot for sponsoring today's video. Hi guys, welcome back. Today I'm sharing 5 beginner-friendly DIY projects. These projects require minimal tools and they're perfect for if you're just starting out. Let's jump into the first DIY, which is this Anthropologie mirror look-alike. For this DIY, I'm going to be duplicating the famous gleaming primrose mirror by Anthropologie. If you're not familiar, here's a picture. This is a stunning vintage inspired mirror, but they cost between $550 and $1,600, so I'm going to DIY mine for under $140. I'm using a 24 by 30 inch mirror that I got from Home Depot. It was only $22, and then I'm going to cut the mirror so that the top corners are rounded. If you don't want to cut your own mirror, you could have a local glass company cut it for you, or you can buy one already shaped the way you want it and skip all the hard steps and just add the details and paint. I thought it would be fun to start from scratch and completely customize it myself. For the back panel, I'm using a 2 foot by 4 foot project panel of 1/2 inch MDF. The MDF is the same width of my mirror, so all I needed to do was mark the length on my MDF board. Next, I used a bowl to round off the top 2 corners. Then I used my jigsaw to cut out the rounded corners. I set my MDF on top of my mirror and then used a Sharpie to trace the MDF onto the mirror. I got a little glass cutting kit from Home Depot. It was only 16 bucks. The glass cutter has this little wheel blade. I'm going to use the MDF as a guide for my cut, but I have to move it away from the line just a little bit so that the wheel lines up perfectly with the Sharpie line. I dipped the blade in the oil and then with a good amount of pressure made 1 pass, scoring the mirror. Make sure you are wearing safety glasses and gloves. Next, I moved the mirror so that the waste was hanging off the end of the table, and then with the ball end of the mirror cutter, I tapped the bottom of the mirror on the score line and waist side. I've seen a few different tutorials and there were mixed reviews of tapping above or below the mirror. From my experience, tapping above the mirror did not work as well. When you tap it, you can see the score line getting deeper and deeper until it cracks all the way through and snaps off. I used a metal file to file down any sharp areas. As you can see, it's not perfect, but I'm using trim that will overhang my mirror about 1/2 inch, so I have some room to hide those small imperfections. Now that the mirror is cut, I'm going to glue it to the MDF using some strong construction adhesive. I put a towel on the mirror with a few weights to let it sit overnight. Now it's time to trim out the mirror. I looked all over for some type of flexible trim for this project. I found this perfect flexible PVC trim. The trim comes in 8-foot lengths and I got 2 of them. You're definitely going to need a few pair of hands for this step. I mitered the first corner at a 45-degree angle on my miter saw. You don't need to miter the corners, but this gives a really professional, seamless look. I had my husband help me bend the PVC around the mirror so I could mark out the other end of the PVC. I cut an angle on the other end with my miter saw, added some construction adhesive to the trim, and then wrapped the trim around the mirror. We used 2 clamps going left and right and 2 clamps going up and down. Then I measured for the bottom trim, mitered both of those ends as well, applied some adhesive, and then clamped those in place. After everything was clamped down and set in place, I used 1-inch brad nails and secured a brad nail every 6 inches or so around the mirror. You want to make sure your brad nail goes directly into the 1/2 inch MDF. You don't want to aim up and scratch or crack your mirror. I used some wood filler and filled all the small nail holes as well as cracks in the miter joints. I let the clamps sit overnight and took them off in the morning. Next, it's time to add the wood accents. I found these wood decals at Lowe's, but you can find all sorts of decals on Amazon. I used super glue and clamps to secure each of the pieces to my mirror. If you don't have clamps, tape works pretty well to hold your decals in place too. Now I'm going to add some rhinestones to the top of the mirror to give it that vintage look. This bag came with small, medium, and large rhinestones, but I used the medium size. I just used super glue to secure each of the rhinestones. I plan on leaning this mirror against the wall, but you could add a bracket to the back of the MDF piece if you want to hang it on your wall. Last step is paint. I taped off the entire mirror. I was going to use some acrylic paint, but it wasn't sticking to the PVC very well. So instead I took the mirror outside and spray painted the border with pure gold spray paint. And voila, you have a beautiful vintage inspired mirror for a fraction of the cost. We have this beautiful ottoman in our living room, but it's soft and we can't use it to put drinks on or anything, so I'm building a small waterfall style coffee table that slides over the ottoman. The first step is to cut your materials down to size. I'm building this waterfall coffee table to go over our 46-inch wide and 18-inch tall ottoman. The coffee table will be 48 inches wide by 19 inches tall. If you're using wheels, make sure to account for that when determining the height of the coffee table. These wheels are 2 inches tall. For lumber, I'm using stair treads. I got these at Home Depot. They come 4 foot long and 11.5 inches wide. These have a nice rounded edge and they're 1 inch thick, so they feel nice and sturdy. If you're wanting to do a thinner table like me, this is a great option for lumber. I angled my miter saw at 45 degrees to cut each of the top corners. To secure the pieces together, I'm using wood glue and 1 1/4 inch screws. I started by drilling a few holes with a countersink bit so that the screws sit beneath the surface. I glued up the corner of one board and used some blue tape to temporarily hold the board in place. Next, I drilled 4 small holes and then secured the pieces together with 1 1/4 inch screws. After the coffee table was assembled, I attached the 2-inch wheels. If you're building this to go over an ottoman like me, I think the wheels are a nice touch so you can easily slide the table back and forth. You barely notice the wheels, and if you have more of a shag rug, they'll be completely hidden. Now it's time to finish the table, so I'm filling any holes and cracks with wood filler. Once the wood filler is dry, I took my sander and sanded everything down, making sure to also get the corners to round them off a bit. Next, I'm applying this Bare Premium wood stain in the color Espresso. I did 1 coat with a rag and it was looking a little bit too blotchy, so I went back in and did another coat with a paintbrush. Last, I did a few coats of this spray-on polyurethane, making sure to lightly sand in between each coat. When I'm not working on projects, I'm editing footage, posting on social media, and working on all the behind-the-scenes tasks that come with owning a business. I'm constantly on my devices, whether that be my desktop computer, laptop, or cell phone. If you're tech savvy and love devices like I do, you should want to protect them and your own identity. When it comes to digital life, I leave it to Webroot Premium and their all-in-one security solution for providing peace of mind. Award-winning Webroot antivirus has partnered with Allstate Identity Protection to provide customers with the peace of mind they deserve. With Webroot Premium, you'll have antivirus protection against emerging threats for up to 5 devices, a password manager, plus a system optimizer to clean your devices and erase traces of online activity. And now with Allstate Identity Protection, you can get credit, dark web, identity, and financial monitoring with proactive alerts on threats to your identity. Webroot's leading antivirus software is lightweight and doesn't interrupt your work. The installation process is easy. Like I mentioned before, you can protect up to 5 devices. I'm protecting my desktop computer, laptop, and cell phone, as well as my husband's laptop and cell phone. Unfortunately, this is one of those things that you don't realize you need until it's too late. So with the rise in cybercrime and identity theft, it's best to be proactive and protect your devices and your identity today. Buy now and save 40% for a limited time. Check out the link in the description below for more information. The next project is this simple picture molding. I started by taking measurements of the 2 walls that I plan to do the detailed trim on. I used SketchUp to lay out each of the boxes that I could get a better idea of scale and what they'll look like. SketchUp is a great tool to use for this, otherwise you can just sketch it out on a piece of paper. Once you measure your boxes and the spacing, you'll need to get individual measurements for each trim piece. Now that I have my measurements, I'm going to go ahead and cut everything to size on my miter saw. I mitered each of the corners at a 45-degree angle. Now it's time to install the trim. I'm using Liquid Nails construction adhesive, my brad nailer, and 1.5 inch brad nails to install the trim. I started by measuring the gap at the top and on the left side. I used my level to make a nice level line. I added a few tiny beads of liquid nails to each of the trim pieces and then used a few 1.5 inch brad nails to nail each trim piece in place. I had to work around our TV mount and a few outlets. If you're able to completely move your outlet, that would be ideal, or you can just work around it like I did. I used my multi-tool to make small cuts around the outlet. I just installed one trim piece at a time, making sure that each one was nice and level. After all the trim pieces were installed, I used wood filler to fill in each of the corner joints and all the tiny nail holes. After the wood filler was dry and sanded down, I caulked all the seams. This isn't a necessary step, but it really helps to give your trim a seamless, professional look. After the caulk was dry, I went in and painted the entire living room. Our original white was a little too gray, so I used a brighter white. And there you have some simple picture molding that completely transforms your space. Next project is a custom spice rack. This spice rack is going to sit on our countertop, but you can mount it on the back of your pantry door or hang it up on a wall. For this project, I'm using 1x4s for the side supports, 1x3s for the shelves, 3/8 inch wooden dowels, and a 3/4 inch project panel for the back. You want to get out the spice jars that you plan on using or any additional containers you'd like to store so that you can get an idea of spacing. I have a 3/8 inch drill bit to drill holes for the dowels, my brad nailer and 1.5 inch brad nails, some wood glue, and 24-inch clamps. First, you'll want to lay out your spices to figure out how big you want your spice rack to be and to get an idea of spacing. Once you have that set, you can cut your materials down to size. For reference, the overall dimension of my spice rack is 29 inches tall and 19.5 inches wide. I want to round the corners of the side support, so I'm tracing a bowl to get that arch design. I used a circle saw to cut the materials down to size, and I used my jigsaw to round the corners of those side supports. After the materials were cut, I used my orbital hand sander to get all the wood nice and smooth. Now that all of your materials are cut down to size, measure and mark out where you want your shelves and dowels to go. To make holes for the 3/8 inch dowels, I'm using a 3/8 inch drill bit. I put a piece of tape on the drill bit, so I only drilled into the wood 1/4 inch. Dry fit all your pieces to make sure everything fits properly. Then use wood glue and clamps to secure each of your pieces. Once the clamps were in place, I reinforced with 1.5 inch brad nails. Use some wood filler to fill any nail holes. Once the wood filler has dried, sand it down and sand down any sharp corners as well. I used Bear Premium Wood Stain in the color Espresso. Then finished with a few coats of satin polyurethane, lightly sanding in between each coat. And that is how to make your own custom spice rack. The next project is this beadboard wall treatment. For this project, I'm using 3 4x8 panels of beadboard, 2 8-foot long chair rail trim pieces, and 2 8-foot long 1x4 primed boards. I also picked up some painting supplies and liquid nails to apply to the back of the beadboard. I'm starting with a blank wall. I already took my outlet covers off. Don't mind the dots all over the wall. That was from a previous accent wall project that I took down and wasn't loving. So the first step is to take off your base trim. If you have trim with a thicker profile, you can probably leave it and set the beadboard on top of it. My trim has a thinner profile, so I decided to swap it out for a 3/4 inch thick 1x4 board. I used a utility knife to score the caulk and then used a hammer and small pry bar to pry the trim off the wall. Make sure to remove any leftover nails sticking out. To make room for my new trim, I had to notch out the trim on the left and right walls with my multi-tool. I took an 8-foot piece of trim and square cut each end so the ends are nice and square. I used my brad nailer and 1.5 inch brad nails to secure the base trim to the wall, making sure the trim was nice and level. I'm setting my beadboard on top of the trim, so it's important the trim is level so my beadboard is nice and level. I had to raise the trim up a bit, covering the existing trim marks, so I'm going to have to install some shoe trim to the very bottom later on. After the trim was installed, I went out to cut the beadboard to length. I used a scrap piece of wood as my straight edge and clamped it down to my beadboard to make a nice straight cut. These are 8-foot long sheets, but I cut them down to 5 feet. I used an entire tube of liquid nails on the first sheet, stuck it to the wall, made sure it was level, and then secured some 1-inch brad nails to hold it in place while the liquid nails set. Make sure to match up the ends of the beadboard to continue with the pattern and to create a seamless look. For the next piece, I had to notch out an outlet. I transferred the measurement for the outlet onto the beadboard and then cut it out with a jigsaw. You can also use a multi-tool. Either way, I recommend doing this on a workbench. I applied the liquid nails and then secured it to the wall with a few brad nails. Make sure to press the beadboard down all over to get rid of any big gaps. I had to rip my last piece down. I cut it to size using the same straight edge trick and my circle saw. The beadboard is installed and you can see how nice the seams match up. now I'm working on the top trim. There's all sorts of trim that you could use for this. I just wanted a simple, classy trim, so I used this curved chair rail. I squared off each end of the first 8-foot trim piece and then cut the second one down to size. I installed the trim with 1.5-inch brad nails. To finish this project off, I filled all the small nail holes with wood filler and then caulked all the seams to create a clean, seamless finish. Last but not least, I added a few coats of paint, and there you have a quick and easy beadboard accent wall. Those are my 5 beginner DIY projects. I hope this sparked some motivation or inspiration for your next DIY project. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.